So before we jump into it, just a quick introduction to who I am. I'm Charlie. I'm the sustainability expert at Root. I've supported over 80 companies on their sustainability journeys, really through creating and helping implement sustainability strategies, helping companies certify as B Corps, and also conducting life cycle assessments. So my background is really before Root was in consulting, but I also worked in-house at Amazon Fashion for a year, where I helped coordinate a sustainable cotton sourcing program. I also helped Amazon build a sustainable fashion line. And I'm really passionate about enabling companies to make data-driven, informed choices. Really, truly believe, just from being a consultant for over 5 years, now that I've really been kind of opened my eyes to life cycle assessment, I really think that companies who do stuff like build strategies without a life cycle assessment are really making decisions blind. So that's why it's really exciting working at Root, where I truly believe life cycle assessments like Root can really transform companies' sustainability journeys. I can see someone else has joined. Hey, Boris, great to see you there.
Hello, Charlie.
Very nice to meet you. We've just started, so you haven't missed anything yet. Before we jump in, I think it would be really helpful, Louise, I know you gave a quick intro, but it would be great, Louise and Boris, if you could just provide a quick intro to who you are, the company you work for, and also what's helpful is understanding what would you like to learn from this webinar.
Mhm. So we are well, we work at the cycle. The cycle is a platform to manage sustainability for companies. We our clients create their source of truth database of ESG data um, that well, can process um, any kind of information and
Mhm.
output it to many use cases, including lifecycle analysis. I'm Luis. I'm one of the co-founders and CPO. Boris is with me. He's a data and product engineer, LCA expert as well. So we're both familiar with the topic. And from my side, um, I'm 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 quite interested about how could or what are your views on performing mass lifecycle analysis on portfolios, products, and and how you make it scalable for companies.
There's a little bit of background noise on your side, Louise, but did I hear what? Can you just repeat slightly? You're interested in how Root provides LCAs what type of products?
All right,
I
now
can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you much better now. It's all good.
yeah, yeah. Sorry. So I was just saying that I'm I've already seen a demo of Root from
Mm-hmm.
your colleague. What was his name? I remember. I forgot. Uh,
Hi.
yeah. Um. So I found it quite interesting, the product. So I want to get a little bit more in-depth knowledge about what's your perspective and your views on automated lifecycle assessment in at scale. Well, it's exactly what your title says. So how you can overcome the blockers and data gaps uh, from life that arise in lifecycle assessment.
No problem. We'll definitely cover that. Cool. Boris?
Yeah, I work with Liz. I'm an environmental engineer and also data analyst. So really interested in how you approach this automated LCA analysis, because something like it's always so technical and difficult to perform an LCA analysis. So it's kind of interesting to know how you can do it at scale. So yeah, I'm not in exactly in one type of product, but also in like maybe in a transversal way if it's possible. But yeah, just interested in that.
Okay. So as you both work for Cycle, and I just want to make sure that this webinar is really providing the best value for you. So what I will do is I'll go through an introduction to kind of who Root is, and then the topic of the webinar, which is around supply chain transparency, and give lots of time for Q&A, where you can ask these questions, you can deep dive into those key things, exactly kind of the technical side of exactly how do we automate life cycle at scale. Cool. So I'm just going to jump in. So kind of the agenda for today in this webinar, we'll be covering a quick introduction to Root and also provide, so just exactly who Root is, our process, how we automate lifecycle assessment, and then also provide an introduction into kind of what this topic of this webinar is really around, which is an overview of what supply chain transparency is and tips on how to improve supply chain transparency. Deep dive into kind of the key supply chain initiatives, which a life cycle assessment would really help. So really around ISO standards, digital product passports, and environmental product declarations. So provide an overview what these key initiatives are and how they enhance supply chain transparency. And then lastly, the role that life cycle assessment can play in improving supply chain transparency with a focus on these key initiatives. And then this will give us lots of time for Q&A at the end. So if you both have any questions, feel free just to add them into the chat or just write them down, and then we can cover it in the Q&A. Actually, just because it's just the three of us, like if you actually have any questions, just put your hand up and we can just cover it on the call. It's all good. Very, very casual.
Okay, awesome.
Great. And also I'm only working on one screen, so I can't see your faces. So just put your hands up if you have any questions and I'll stop. Cool. So firstly, just providing an introduction to who Root is. I'm sure Louise Heisch might have told you this before, but really calculating your company's footprint can be incredibly complex and time consuming, especially for product companies seeking to understand the impact of all of their products. So that's why we've created Root. Root is a collaborative platform to collect the right data, gain insights into and improve the lifecycle impacts of all products within companies. Root's vision is to redefine the norm by making product footprints universal. And our mission is that we aim to automate lifecycle assessment at scale for everyone. So really, why are product footprints so important? Companies are in this race towards net zero. And in order to achieve this, they must master the full life cycles of all of their products. So why is lifecycle assessment the solution? Mainly because companies urgently need affordable and scalable access to all of their product footprints. This is crucial in today's business environment for several reasons. Firstly, it's really crucial to have these product footprints for regulations and for voluntary standards. Compliance with regulations like the Green Claims Directive, CSRD, and CSDDD is not optional. Companies must report effectively on these frameworks to avoid greenwashing and avoid severe fines. Product footprints are also really important for growth and transparency. So meeting transparency demands is essential for retaining customers and winning tenders. And accurate Scope 3 data, which comes from product footprints, really drives product innovation and can accelerate companies' net zero journey. So lifecycle is a really important part to play in companies' sustainability strategies, but there are several challenges with traditional lifecycle assessment. Firstly, they are very complex and costly. They're too complex, they're fully manual, and they're very expensive. As a result, they're not scalable as each assessment is for a single product. They're also inaccessible. The majority of lifecycle assessments can only really be understood by academics or LCA experts. This means many companies don't have the necessary internal knowledge to really understand the lifecycle assessment results and use them to drive impact. And lastly, lifecycle assessments are inefficient. Aligning all stakeholders is a complex and time-consuming process. So this is really why we created Root. Our platform offers a solution that is scalable. It's capable of handling thousands of lifecycle assessments at once, integrating data from internal systems. Our platform is fast. We can deliver results in 1 to 6 months using our AI algorithms and databases. And we're user-friendly and accessible. No prior lifecycle assessment knowledge is needed. We always say of our customers, you share the data and we'll take care of the rest. So this next slide is really just to emphasize kind of the difference between using automated lifecycle assessment versus traditional lifecycle assessment. So as mentioned, traditional lifecycle assessment involves high costs and requires extensive time investments. And usually in companies, there's multiple lifecycle specialists working in the company. Root, on the other hand, is significantly more cost effective and faster. So in this example, an example beer company with 500 products, creating product footprints can be up to 50 times cheaper and 40 times faster than a traditional lifecycle assessment. This saves companies significant time and money by using platform, and you can use that time instead to really create impact using the results of the lifecycle assessment. So this is probably kind of what you're both very interested in, is kind of how does this work, what our approach looks like. So our platform integrates seamlessly with various software systems. We collect and iterate data to reduce environmental impact. We use artificial intelligence and algorithms to centralize your data and create dynamic LCA dashboards. Ultimately, what this is doing, this is converting really complex lifecycle assessment information into simple, easy to understand insights that you can use to drive impact in your company. And our process is straightforward. Firstly, we have a kickoff meeting where we start with a kickoff call to really set up your Root account and draft an action plan with a timeline. The next step is to collect the data. So we define the scope of the lifecycle assessment for you, and then you upload your data using our really simple data collection modules. We guide you through each step of the data collection process. The next step is on our side, we convert all the data, we transform your product data into impact data, and we automatically calculate your company and product footprints. And then the last step is to really use those insights to drive impact and communicate impact authentically. So what this looks like is you can identify hotspots in your business of where the key environmental impact is happening. You can set reduction targets, and you can drive sustainability performance in your company. So before we kind of deep dive into the topic of supply chain transparency, I just want to stop there and ask if you have any kind of initial questions have come to mind.
Not for the moment.
Cool, no worries. So now we're just going to deep dive into the topic of this webinar, which is supply chain transparency. So supply chain transparency centers on 3 key principles. Firstly, it's around gaining full visibility. So this is understanding where your products come from by tracing their journey from raw materials to the final product. Second key principle is practicing due diligence. So what this looks like is making sure every part of your supply chain meets high environmental and social sustainability standards. And then the last key principle is communicating externally. So really transparently sharing the impact of your supply chain with your stakeholders. And why is supply chain transparency important? This is something which is really becoming very important for a number of reasons in company sustainability strategies. Firstly, because supply chain transparency builds trust and credibility with stakeholders like customers and investors. Maintaining a transparent supply chain future-proofs businesses as it helps you comply with regulations and avoid issues that could impact your brand's reputation. And lastly, it's a way to stand out. A transparent supply chain distinguishes your brand in a competitive market. So kind of what are the key ways to improve supply chain transparency? The first advice is really to have a strong understanding of your supply chain. So map out your entire supply chain and leverage existing technology to do this. So increasingly, companies are using technology like blockchain to gain visibility into products' supply chains. You can also use technology like blockchain to monitor your supply chain closely. These tools can create real-time data, which improves visibility on your supply chain. And lastly, technology like artificial intelligence and machine learning can process vast amounts of data and help you identify inefficiencies and potential risks in your supply chain. Yes, Louise.
Hi, Charlie. To what route? What kind of companies or sectors does route or this approach most apply to? Because from our experience, there's a lot of suppliers, especially in Spain, for example, in our market or in specific industries like textile industry,
Mm.
which suppliers are have very low degrees of digitalization, um, and have quite a poor data sets and even contactability.
Mm.
Um, we have huge clients. I mean, in big textile, huge clients in the textile industry, for example, that even with all the power, they can't even go further than level 2, level 3 supplier in the supply chain. So what are your insights in this?
It's a really good question, and it's something which we've been really exploring because we've been talking to lots of companies in different sectors. And yes, naturally, some sectors have higher degrees of visibility already on their supply chain than others. Fashion is definitely the one which really stands out as having very low visibility. It's something which it's really important that these companies start acting fast and really start leveraging these technologies, other stuff here, like partnering with their suppliers to really gain that visibility. So we'll be kind of covering this later in the presentation, but there's a lot of regulations coming in which require that type of visibility. And it's, yeah, I spoke to a friend, I spoke to several people in the fashion sector around this, and it's something which, as an industry, the fashion sector really need to focus on so they can start complying with incoming regulations and stuff. Yes, like mapping your supply chain using technology like blockchain is very essential to really improve that supply chain transparency, which doesn't exist yet. And that's also
Thank you.
it's life cycle assessment can definitely help with that, but also they need to focus on supply chain transparency to provide the data to create accurate life cycle assessments in sectors like the fashion sector, which aren't transparent at the moment, their supply chains. Any other questions about that, Louise? All good?
No, thank you. Thank
Cool.
you. So yeah, I guess we're kind of the same page. There's no optimal um, or great or a big way to solve it at the moment, or the industry has not found yet a standard, or well, they have a lot to walk through.
They definitely do. And there's a lot of pressure on the fashion sector to improve its supply chain transparency. So it's something which they really need to work on quite fast. I think that's like should be a key focus for fashion sector to really focus on that. One thing is really around the digital product passports, which I'm going to cover later on in this presentation, which will really boost the pressure for companies to really get a grip on their supply chain and start working with their suppliers to understand where their products are coming from. So yes, like key ways to improve transparency for especially for sectors which don't typically right now have very good grasp on their supply chains. Firstly, map their supply chain, use technology like blockchain to gain visibility. A second key thing is really to work with your suppliers to create strong relationships with your suppliers. For example, for fashion companies which don't have visibility beyond tier 1 or tier 2, a really key next step is to build strong relationships with the suppliers that they do have visibility on, so they can start tracking and start building the relationships with going down the supply chain into stuff like the farm level where they don't currently have visibility. So a really key thing is to promote open communication with your suppliers, offer support and incentives to encourage their participation in transparency efforts, such as responding to data requests. And the last really key thing around achieving transparency is sharing the impact of your supply chain. So supply chain transparency shouldn't be an internal exercise. You should really share your findings with the world, use product labeling, impact reports, the company website, and social media to communicate supply chain details to your consumers and to other stakeholders, because that's a really key way to build trust with your stakeholders. So how can automated lifecycle assessment platforms like Root help improve supply chain transparency? One key way is that it can really help map your supply chain. So automated lifecycle assessment tools pull data from various sources to map supply chains. For example, Root uses companies' purchase and sales orders to automatically map supply chains for thousands of products at once. This gives companies a really clear view on one platform onto each of their products' value chain, including their suppliers and their transport routes. Another key way which automated lifecycle assessment helps improve supply chain transparency is that it scales product footprints. So automated lifecycle assessments provide detailed information about products' environmental impact throughout its life cycle. Root, for example, can provide insights into the product's environmental impact across 6 key impact categories. This data helps companies make smarter choices around sourcing, production, and distribution. And last but not least is that automated lifecycle assessment helps companies gain detailed insights. So as mentioned, automated lifecycle platforms can perform thousands of lifecycle assessments simultaneously, efficiently handling large product portfolios. This scalability is crucial for achieving full supply chain transparency across all of the products in your portfolio. And Root also provides very granular, accurate data. This means that companies don't need to rely on benchmark data or secondary data. They're using primary data. And this really empowers companies to reduce the environmental impact of their supply chains effectively. So kind of the last kind of key thing to really cover in this webinar before we go into Q&A is really just deep diving into the key supply chain transparency initiatives and how automated lifecycle assessment can help with this. So a key one to really mention here is digital product passports, which Louise, I mentioned before, because this really is linked to the fashion sector in particular. So what this is a game-changing initiative in Europe. A digital product passport is essentially a digital twin of a physical product, gathering comprehensive data about a product throughout its life cycle. So what this looks like is that this will have something like a QR code or some kind of barcode on a physical product, which people can scan with devices like their phones, and they get in-depth comprehensive data around the product throughout its life cycle. So stuff like where it was sourced, the factories that are being used, the social and environmental performance of the factories, the end-of-life options. The passport will give the consumer or empower the consumer to understand how to effectively recycle or dispose of the product in an environmentally friendly way. This is a really key initiative in Europe because it will help companies comply with several European regulations. The most important one to mention is the Eco Design for Sustainable Product regulation. This regulation is really important to highlight because it requires the creation of passports to comply with the regulation. So there's several regulations where having a passport would help a company comply with the regulation, whereas the Eco Design for Sustainable Product regulation is a necessary part of complying with that regulation. So with this regulation, the sectors in scope for the initial sectors in scope and need to create the passport to comply with the regulation are textiles, batteries, electronics, and they need the passports by 2026. And then there's a secondary focus sector, a group of sectors which will they will need to have the passport in the future after 2026. This regulation was passed in July, so it's very new and it's very much in the process of being defined exactly kind of when the secondary focus area sectors will need the passports. This initiative will really improve supply chain transparency because in order to create the passport needs detailed data about the sustainability impact of every stage of a product's life cycle. So if this is from the raw materials being used all the way through manufacturing, distribution, to how the product can be disposed of or recycled at end of life. This creates full visibility of a product throughout its life cycle. And in addition, I've mentioned blockchain technology, but it's very strongly encouraged that companies use blockchain technology to create the digital product passports, because that really creates a tamper-proof and trustworthy data collection process, and it really builds confidence to make sure that the supply chain information in the product passport is very credible and has integrity. We have a blog that's just been created, and we're going to release a LinkedIn post about this tomorrow. So if you're interested, look at our LinkedIn tomorrow, and we'll have a link to the blog on our website where you can find out more about this initiative. The second kind of key standard are the ISO standards. So these ISO standards provide internationally recognized guidelines and requirements for a range of environmental sustainability topics. There are 7 ISO standards that relate to conducting LCAs and using LCAs as evidence for other sustainability commitments, like using LCA data to support credible net zero targets. And conducting an LCA which aligns with ISO standards means that you're following best practices in the field and completing a really credible, robust life cycle assessment. Within these particular ISO standards which relate to LCA, there are particular data requirements and other requirements that companies need to really follow around the type of supply chain data needed to conduct an LCA which aligns with the ISO standards. So when you conduct an LCA which aligns with these standards, you must have detailed data and a really strong understanding of your supply chain. Great. And the last thing to mention here is the environmental products declaration. So what this is, these are a declaration that create transparent data around a product's environmental performance. This really helps with companies around creating carbon emission reduction efforts, and is a really useful tool to help people make smarter choices around which products to buy. Environmental product declarations are widely adopted in the construction sector, and they're increasingly being used in other sectors like furniture and automotives. These are a really key way to improve supply chain transparency, because environmental product declarations require detailed, verified environmental impact information, including information around the product supply chain to create the declaration. Therefore, creating these declarations require gathering much needed data around the product supply chain. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So kind of the last thing to really kind of talk about here is the synergies between lifecycle assessment and these key supply chain initiatives. So automated lifecycle assessment platforms like Root are really transformative in providing the data needed for companies to begin using these lifecycle, providing the data needed to create these supply chain initiatives. And this is because lifecycle assessments platforms like Root offer in-depth insights and data into product supply chains. So firstly, kind of really deep diving into digital product passports. LCAs are not mandatory requirement for digital product passports, but they really help create the passport in several ways. Firstly, because using an automated LCA platform like Root allows your companies to conduct thousands of life cycles at once. This gives you the data needed on all of your product portfolio to create the digital product passports for all of your products. Automated lifecycle platforms like Root also provide detailed data across key environmental metrics needed in the digital product passport, like water use, carbon emissions, and waste. So as mentioned, Root's platform provides data on 6 impact categories, and you can use that data to create the passport. And lastly, automated lifecycle platforms like Root create highly detailed granular data, which is needed to meet the data requirements for digital product passports. So what this means is that in order to create the digital product passport, they need very in-depth knowledge around the product footprint of products, and Root's platform can provide that level of granularity needed. Now, just looking at the ISO standards, lifecycle assessment is a central component of several ISO standards. There's a lot of kind of long names here, but ones to really kind of key ones to really mention is the ISO 14040 and 14044. These ISO standards are really the key ones which define the principles and the framework and the methodology of conducting an LCA. So of course you need to conduct an LCA to do that. Another key one to really mention is the ISO 14025. This is what companies need to do to create environmental product declarations. So in order to have an environmental product declaration, you need to conduct an LCA which aligns with the ISO 14025. So what this means here is that LCAs are integral to having these ISO standards that you're aligning to, because LCA is a key component to aligning with these ISO standards. And kind of the last thing to mention here is environmental product declarations. As I just mentioned, conducting an LCA is a mandatory requirement for creating an environmental product declaration, and they need to follow the ISO 14025. So conducting an LCA provides a foundation for environmental product declarations. They offer essential environmental impact data that's needed to have the declaration, and that key information that's needed includes information about the supply chain, about the product. So kind of the key thing to say here is that automated lifecycle assessment provide detailed product footprints around your entire product portfolio, including your product supply chain, and that data around the supply chain is needed to really for companies to be able to really engage with these key supply chain transparency initiatives. So I'm just going to stop there and ask, does anyone have any questions about any of that? Just going to open the floor to questions.
How ready do you think companies are to tackle the European passport?
I think companies, so I wrote a blog about this last week, and I was quite surprised by how much detail is needed to create that passport. I think companies which are in the initial focus sector that should be a really prime focus of their sustainability initiatives in the upcoming months and years, to have the data needed on their supply chain to create the passport. I would say I haven't spoken to companies yet about digital product passports, but my gut feeling would be the companies which are these three initial sectors, so textiles, electronics, batteries, they probably have an understanding of what they need to start doing, whereas the other sectors, which are the secondary initial focus areas, and then after that, post 2026, this is probably something which is on their radar, but are not actively trying to start gathering the data needed to create the passport. But saying that, companies should really start moving quite fast, because it's, like I said, it's not a nice to have. This is an absolute requirement to comply with the eco design regulations. So they really need to start moving fast to collect that data and improve their supply chain transparency. Does anybody else have any other questions?
How much can you automate?
Sorry, what was that? Can you repeat, please?
How much can you automate? What do you need to make the automatic LCA? You need a lot of manual work.
So it is automated. What we need, the key information that we need to do it is we need the company's purchase orders and sales orders, and from that we can map out the company's supply chain, and then from that we ask for additional information about the facilities being used in the supply chain, the transport routes, and also information about the company's products, so what materials are being used in the products.
And you find if there's no volume or quantity in the purchase orders, how do you base it on spend, or how do you do it?
We base it on weight. That
Weight. Okay, so you need weight in the purchase order, or does that need to be added?
it's something which we automatically gather from the purchase and sales orders, but then we ask companies to verify to make sure that that's accurate.
Okay, so how do you calculate it if it's not verified?
So from the purchase and sales order, we can gather that information about the weight.
Okay, so for do you have an example of that?
Yeah, sure. I can just get up what the platform looks like. I can show you. Sorry, it's not weight, it's quantity. So that's what we're looking at here. So what the process looks like is that the company uploads the purchase and sales order, and then we use the quantity of each of the products in the product portfolio. So just I can provide a really quick intro to this. So what we do is we ask you to upload the purchase and sales orders, and then this is, like I said, we map the entire supply chain using that information. Key information that we need after that is we need for each of the products kind of what is the materials being used in each of the products, and that's typically found by companies providing a thing called bill of materials.
Yeah.
And then other key things, like I said, is like the facilities being used. So this is just an example of 5 key suppliers being used in the supply chain. And then we also ask for information about the transport routes, which again, we identify through looking and analyzing the purchase and sales orders. That's the data upload process. So these are the key information that we need. And then after that, it's automated.
Right. Thanks.
No problem. Luis, any other questions?
Are does the suppliers or have you seen in any of your clients where the supplier comes in and shares data to well to provide for the transparency, or is it mostly on secondary data?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we do, I can show you. So this is this is an example of supply chain. So what we do here is we've identified to tier 1 what the key supply chain is, what the key suppliers are for tier 1, and we ask for the client to provide information about this. So here you can see key information that we're asking for. If I just give an example of electricity, yeah, stuff like the amount of electricity being used, the electricity sources. So this is all from tier 1. Saying that, after that, then we use secondary data after that. So we ask for primary data for tier 1, then after that it goes into secondary data. It's actually something which we're looking into. We're in conversations with companies which can hopefully provide more primary data, more accurate data into each of the products supply chains. So ideally we're trying not to use primary data, but right now we're using primary data for tier 1, and after that it goes into secondary data.
And the assignment from this primary data to the functional unit, do you have any approach on that? Because we also look into that with our clients, and it's a quite a difficult one.
Yeah, no, this is a very good question. It's something which Haj would be better placed to answer because he's the LCA expert on that one. So I can ask Haj that, and I can get back to you on that.
Awesome, thank you.
Make a note of that. Cool. Do either of you have any other questions?
All good from my side, Charlie. Thank you very much.
Same here.
Cool. Well, thank you both so much for joining. There's going to be a recording of this session on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you ever want to just kind of go back and listen again to the webinar topic, just feel free to go onto our YouTube channel. Brilliant. Well, I hope you both have lovely afternoons. And if you want to have another demo, or if you have any questions, then feel free just to go onto our website and you can contact us. Or Louise, of course, you can just message Heish or Mad.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Charlie.
Awesome. Yeah. Keep up the
Bye.
good work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye bye.